Hello world, here's to Second Chances. We're here with the concluding chapter of Season 8's Armageddon, quite aptly titled Harmony, because even though it might not seem it on the face of things, this chapter actually brings us to quite a harmonious close that personally has made me view the entire story in a much better light. So, is baby okay? Mayhem, destruction, got a few quips in. All in all, reckon I'm doing alright. I'm happy for you, Megs. Always have been. I just wish you were happy for me. Take my arm! Lovely choice of words there. Yeah, nah. You can keep the bloody thing. This is why I love this chapter so much. Carkitayano, Walter. Maggie! Apparently this means see you again. We'll come back to that. Take heart, Walter Fitzroy. Many yet liefer for your efforts. Many ain't all, mate. Come back to that as well. Don't be too hard on yourself. Been enough of that going around. To second chances? To second chances for life fighters. Well, bloody oath. Yes, man. Reckon I'll drink to that. Harmonious in its way on the surface there, right? And I do like that he's finally gained their acceptance. That is a big part of what this storyline was about. But the actual emotional core of this story, and the reason I love this bit so much, was Maggie. The thing that I love about her choice here is not only that she's finally gone through the emotional growth to be able to let Fuse go, but that in doing so, she reframes the entire story as being hers. Like, on the face of things, the story is about Fuse gaining the trust of Lifeline and Bloodhound through his conflict with Maggie. But then that conflict was used to show Maggie how happy Fuse was and that he'd found a place he could finally call home. And then it was up to her to grow to the point of being able to let him go, to say goodbye to her oldest friend, right? Like, she couldn't just let him have the last word. Obviously, that's how their relationship works. I love that take my arm is obviously being used in the exact inverse context that it was originally intended, right? But she gives it up. She, like, tangibly, physically gives up what she was after, getting Fuse back. Because it's best for him. She puts his happiness before her own. And that kind of emotional growth is one, why this chapter is way more harmonious than I say it might seem on the surface, right? Not only has Fuse gained the trust of the legends, but Maggie has been able to grow past him and then allow him to grow past her. She can go back to Salvo now and start focusing on herself and her own proper goals again. And two, it means it makes no sense, as I've seen a lot of people bring up, that she died here. I've seen a lot of people suggest this, and it's sort of suggested here, but this line we'll come back to when we actually discuss Maggie's proper fate here. I want to discuss a bit more about why this helps this season so much, and why this season may not have felt as interesting as we led up to this point, right? But the kind of character growth that Maggie has just displayed, and in obviously giving us the context for the rest of the season that it was actually about her at the heart of things, makes it make no sense on like a narrative level why you'd kill a character off like that. And it makes no sense for Maggie in universe why she'd decide to die here. Like, she's giving up Fuse. That's essentially more important than her life in this instance. Giving up her life isn't even a consideration. Giving Fuse up would be way worse in the first place. And she's got other things to do. She's got to live to accept giving Fuse up and saying goodbye to him. Like, on a narrative level, it makes no sense why Maggie would die here, right? She obviously ends up in some hot water. Again, we'll come back to that shortly. But I can see how, like, the setting that they've used like conflicting with Maggie over abusing the games, and it was all just over her struggling to say goodbye to Fuse. It did make the earlier bits of Armageddon feel a bit sort of clunky, or that it was a bit of like an empty conflict, or the stakes were way lower than they seemed because we knew no one would die. Maggie was threatening us with harm. She didn't seem to really hurt anyone. She seemed to be a threat in the story, but then fun in the actual game. There's a big lot of dissonance there. So I'd say that that is something that they do have to work on. Like, choosing a good setting will allow your emotional journey to feel more resolute by the end. Like, look back to Season 5, The Broken Ghost. Revenant and Loba set us up with an amazing framing device, like this personally motivated, high-concept sci-fi nonsensery that only augmented the strong character writing that underpinned it, yeah? But Revenant and Loba weren't the actual emotional journey that took place. They did have progression in that story, but it was Bangalore and Loba coming to understand each other and then getting the job done despite their initial differences that gave Revenant the context to view Loba as his saviour. So as you can see, the framing device and the emotional journey are never exactly the same thing. Season 6, Pathfinder and Ash were the framing device that led to Mirage and Rampart's bet, which in itself was a framing device to allow Mirage to piss everybody off, which then allowed Wraith to grow to the point of putting him in his place, which then provoked Mirage to grow much more meaningfully as a person to make up for his mistakes, completing his emotional journey. Season 7, Family Portrait. Pathfinder again continues his overall emotional journey as an overarching framing device, pushing Lifeline to confront her parents and grow from that point, Gibraltar to confront Nick and accept his own problems, but all of that was a bigger framing device for the actual emotional journey at the center of Family Portrait that was Octane using his over-the-top narration to show us exactly how he hides from his problems. And then again, as we get to Season 8, the framing device of Fuse gaining the trust of the Legends was actually being used to facilitate the emotional journey of Maggie saying goodbye to her oldest friend. Which, altogether, suggests to me that we need to give these stories the time to reach their concluding chapters so we can see what their emotional core really was, so as to judge them properly on their own terms. Obviously, as we see with this season, as I've mentioned, the framing device for this season didn't feel as gripping. That's sort of decreased as we've gone through the seasons, right? Which hopefully they're changing for Season 9. It seems to be something they're very aware of. However, I can see how the slightly more muddled setting of this season may have contributed to people being less invested, and to this ultimate emotional growth maybe feeling a little less earned, right? We've seen the same problem in something like Overwatch's London Calling, where the emotional journeys of the characters was actually pretty good on paper, but the way that that growth was obtained never felt earned due to shallow setting, weak character conflict, and rushed plot resolutions. That is something that you evidently have to take into account, and something that they're theoretically working on for Season 9 to give us a much stronger setting to get people more invested from the beginning. And that brings us to Maggie's ultimate fate. Which, as I've made my point, I don't think she's dead. I think that's a really stupid thing to do, right? There's one way you can have her die, but we'll come to that. So, as we see here, this campfire takes place at the same moment as the final chapter of the Wattson-Caustic storyline, A Shock to the System, where this very clink of glasses can be seen. After this moment, Wattson informs Caustic that the Syndicate have some creative punishments in mind for Mad Maggie, which, for a start, they can't do if she's dead, unless they make her a simulacrum and use her to maintain order on Salvo, but that's way too much like Revenant's whole deal, and it just sort of ignores her dying if she died to just give her a new conflict, which is admittedly kind of an interesting conflict, but it then also seems to cheapen death in a way that, oh, she died, and that didn't matter at all. Her dying isn't really the issue. Do you see what I mean? Although, if she were to become a simulacrum, it would be quite fitting that Wattson refers to it as a creative punishment to someone like Caustic, when that could be one of the very few ways for him to escape the fate of his deadly disease. So, never mind the fact that Watson's foreshadowing would be completely pointless if Mad Maggie has died. It also seems to be setting us up for a much more interesting and personally motivated conflict for Fuse going forward. That Maggie has been captured by the Syndicate, which is one of the many reasons he could say this here, and Maggie is going to go on to suffer some creative punishments and give Fuse motivation to act against the Syndicate himself in upcoming seasons. The story must go on, right? The best ways I can think of interpreting this is that Fuse either doesn't know that Maggie survived, and he's meant to be like the audience, doubting Maggie's survival, even though from our removed perspective that is kind of really unsatisfying in a way, right? It could be that he knows the Syndicate have captured her, or he knows that she suffered greatly from the fall, which I kind of doubt she would have, because, a few chapters ago, she jumped out of a dropship, so I don't think that's really an issue. She might have a jump kit, all sorts of bullshit, right? But if she was injured and or captured by the Syndicate, ready to receive some creative punishments, many yet live for your efforts, Fuse might not consider that exactly living. You might be alive, but as a torture puppet of the Syndicate, I don't think anyone would consider that a good quality of life, right? And sort of my favourite interpretation is more that he's more concerned about the lives that his and Maggie's feud put at risk. It's again just him being a product of his environment. He expects violence and suffering just at every turn because of growing up on Salvo. But these guys have managed to show him that there's more to that. That what he wanted to be is something he can be here. To second chances, eh? I honestly hope that this has allowed you to give Armageddon a second chance in itself. To give Maggie a second chance, to give this story a second chance at experiencing it. I think this is why everyone likes the community comics so much, that they're consistently like the conclusion to a story arc, which you usually need to know what the story was really about the whole time. The community comics evidently feel much more satisfying to read, not just because they get to be way more experimental visually, and because they give us more content per comic, which I think is like more of a business limitation. On Respawn's end, like a certain number of panels per week means they know exactly in a 3-act structure how much story they can fit in per week. It keeps them consistent with their artists. The community comics don't suffer from that, but I think the main reason why people enjoy them so much more than the in-game comics is because they always give us the ultimate context to understand the storyline that they're based off. Knowing that Caustic has a life-threatening disease makes you view every single interaction he's had thus far in a different light, in a different context, and therefore allows you to understand the conclusion of his arc here, of Fuse's arc, of Maggie's arc here, right? Now that you know where they're meant to conclude, for now, because obviously the show must always go on, you now have the context to understand why the rest of the story really was happening. The logic in world obviously has to add up sequentially, but the narrative heart of the story usually won't actually be totally apparent until the conclusion. You will hint and foreshadow it through the story itself, and even in other places in this multimedia franchise live service narrative that is Apex Legends, but the conclusion is usually the best place to get that kind of thing. And ultimately, as a final point about Maggie, before I finally shut up about this, in a live service narrative, people's lives, even in something like the Apex games, are basically the last thing that you can put at risk. Because it stops you being able to tell stories with the characters. Especially as the playable legends, theoretically, need to always exist, right? So the way that you get around that, and personally tell better stories, is to make the things at risk not be people's lives, but the things that are important to them. Sometimes more important than their own lives in situ, or to the point where their own life isn't a consideration. Again, here, Maggie killing herself has no bearing on this situation. Losing Fuse is more important, to the point that she's not here like, if I can't have Fuse, I can't have anything. It's there like, no, I've been able to let Fuse go. My life was never the issue. And that's the conceit for basically all the characters. Even someone like Revenant, his problem is he can't die. So then you have to threaten his wish for death with stuff that's not death, right? But that also extends to the other characters, that we can't kill them, because that's just a waste. Literally a waste of characters. So what do we put at risk that's at least equally important to them? Maggie saying goodbye to Fuse, losing Fuse, in her eyes, someone she's heavily become sort of emotionally reliant on, until now, that's worth a hell of a lot. Yes, it's not her life, but it still fucking means something to her. And it's good to see that put at risk. I am so glad that this chapter has done what it's done. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. I've been Euclidean Vision, finally getting the fuck out of here. Bloody oath. This has been the personally brilliantly constructed final chapter of Apex Legends Season 8 comic, Armageddon. Here's to second chances. Thank you for staying with me, friends. I've been Euclidean Vision, the emotional support. Take care of yourselves out there, and may the glorious light of Best Girl shine within you. Bye-bye.